On today's episode of Mental Health News Radio, we welcome Seth Carlson to the show. Seth Carlson is a freelance writer, musician, and speaker from Raleigh, North Carolina. He is notably known as the trans life coach in and around the community, where he offers one-on-one mentoring sessions for transgender youth and adults alike. Seth is also the host of a new podcast on the network called Transpired. We've been waiting for an amazing person like Seth to do a show on these topics. Welcome to the network, Seth. And listeners, welcome to the show.
I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried. Will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Seth Carlson, thank you so much for joining us on Mental Health News Radio.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And also your podcast is joining the network as well. Can you tell our listeners the name of the podcast and what it's about?
Absolutely. So I've decided to call it Transpired for several reasons. But it's pretty much just a network, a podcast that is welcoming trans people of all ages and also the parents of transgender youth. And it's just going to talk about some things that aren't necessarily talked about as often, but need to be talked about. And I also wanted to have a little bit of an area for allies and people who don't really understand trans people to just, be able to hear firsthand stories from trans people and kind of get a feel for why we're not, these outcasts and these freaks, that we're just normal people.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to be talking about mental health too, because that plays a big part in the trans community, doesn't it?
Yes, it's probably the most important aspect of it because, from a child, when you start to realize, okay, I might be transgender, or even if you don't know what the word transgender is, you start to understand this is affecting your mental health. Because when I was in middle school, I didn't even know what transgender was, but I knew something was wrong. I kept telling myself, I have this great life and I have both of my parents, but why am I so depressed? Why do I hate myself so much? And of course, that could be a bunch of different things, but I eventually realized that it was because of this deep-rooted, issue, quote unquote, issue that I had, that once I finally understood what trans was, and it was this huge relief of, okay, now there's a label to it. Where can I go from here? And it just as important as having self-confidence and loving yourself is for everyone. It's even more important almost for trans people, just because of all of the pressure that you have. And it's even hard to go outside sometimes if you just hate yourself that much. So it's such an important factor of making sure that your head's in the right place and that you're not falling into some, deep looming darkness. When you can, learn to love yourself, and it doesn't have to be a burden on your life.
I was thinking about this when we spoke the first time, and, take a little journey with me. It might sound a little shallow at first. You said something about, having to go to a party or a family gathering and people not really knowing what's going on or understanding what has gone on with you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it made me think about in a very limited way when the people that I've spoken to that have some kind of an eating disorder, or they just are, well, yeah, have an eating disorder, where let's say um, last year at the family gathering, everybody was pumped and saying, "Oh, you look so great! You look so great!" All the things you shouldn't say to someone
Yeah.
with an eating disorder, and
Definitely.
because maybe they lost some weight, and then the next Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever, you go and you've gained a bunch of weight,
Right.
or you've lost a bunch, either way, and that it's not just showing up for, hey, here I am, we're going to have this family gathering. It's also the, wonder, recrimination, the stares, all the things comments that you might get because of, what you look like physically. And so that times 1,000, probably even more, is the transgender experience.
Right. And you feed off of those comments as well. And I mean, depending on what your family is like, and if they approve or if they don't approve, you're just always thinking about what other people are thinking, especially when you don't necessarily pass. And when I say pass, I mean, pass to the public as the gender that you are in your head. Uh, your family doesn't really know what's going on. And some of these comments that they make toward you can actually be quite detrimental to your mental health. I have so many stories that I share about those things, whether it be family or going to a job interview or your first day in college. So many different things go through a trans person's head that other people outside of you aren't necessarily thinking, or even some questions that you're asked. You might go home and almost want to cry yourself to sleep, but the person who asked the question truthfully just thought that they were, just asking a question. And it can affect you so much on a day-to-day basis. And you have to keep up with that confidence and tell yourself they didn't mean this, or they're just uneducated about it, they didn't mean this. But when you're going through it, especially if you're your youth, or you're in middle school, high school, you're not quite there with that self-love yet. You're not there with the self-confidence. You're still kind of having that journey, and I think we're always going through that journey. But especially as someone who isn't quite fully grown, they're still going through that, whether they're trans or not. So it's so hard to have that confidence within yourself to say, don't listen to other people,
Mhm.
take a breath and think, okay, this person did not mean to offend me. So let me just educate them for a second. And sometimes it's actually hard in that way, because you have to have this kind of, you're always trying to tell people like, this is me, or this is what this means, or this is this term. It's almost like a job.
Yeah.
Basis.
I was thinking like you're supposed to also be the voice of the movement, so that while you're also going through your own personal stuff that's just everyday stuff, and then add to that things with your identity that society doesn't understand or doesn't want to understand. And then everything else. And then it's like, and you're supposed to be totally calm, very patient, like almost be perfect in this state where first of all, that's not reality for anyone. And second of all, you're on your own journey with this, but then you're expected to be the yogi about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We truthfully are all on that same type of journey. It's just so much more deep rooted when it comes to being a transgender person. And I think eventually it will be more normalized. I hate to say that because I feel normal, but how if you look back 10, 15 years ago, we've come such a long way, because even what I'm doing today is to help people who are going through what I went through 10 years ago. I feel that 10 years ago, there was so much less out there on the internet, and
Right.
less users and less resources, because I mean, 2020, where we're at right now, it is truly starting to be a little bit normalized, and people are understanding that it's not this freak of nature type of thing.
Thank goodness. Oh my gosh. We already all feel like a freak of nature in our moments, no matter who you are, what your gender is, what your race is, what your religion. I mean, most, even with a modicum of self-awareness, most people feel like that in some way anyway.
Definitely.
We
And that's
don't need
why,
to add to it.
yeah, exactly. And I try not to take that away from people because I'm not here to say, well, my life is so bad because I'm trans, so you must not have it bad because you're not trans. That's absolutely,
Right.
not the case. It just, a lot of things are definitely amplified. One of my favorite stories to tell is I was going to a job interview when I was about 17, and actually the interview went very well, and the manager was really nice to me and treated me totally normal. And when I got home, I had a text message from the manager, and he just thought that being trans was the coolest thing. Like, he met the first trans person ever, and he texted me and said, I wouldn't even have known until I shook your hand and realized that your hand was not the size of a man's hand. And he
Mm.
said LOL, probably put a laughing emoji, but I that affected me for months. I was afraid to shake people's hands. I was
Oh
afraid.
man.
And in that same sense, as you can't get a surgery to make your hands bigger. So I
Right.
had to tell myself, that's not going to hinder me. That's not going to hold me back. Don't be afraid to shake hands. You know, this was so long ago now. I'm 25. I don't have that fear anymore. I've actually met so many cisgender people, and cisgender just means not trans. Cisgender people who have the same size hand as me. So that's not an issue. But when you're 17 and you're first starting to say, okay, this is me. I can do this. I can go to a job interview. I can be confident. And then someone shoots it down with that question or that comment, and they don't know that they did. He doesn't know that he caused this
Right.
spiral of depression in me for 3 months because of my hands. He just thought he was being funny. And things like that are really important to kind of, I like to get my point across to people who aren't trans by saying, just be careful when you
Right.
ask questions and be careful when you make comments, because it is a really fragile time in the mind of a trans person during transition.
Yeah, it is. I'm really grateful to someone that I knew a while ago. We've lost touch over the years, but and I have many trans people in my life. This just happened to be someone that I was going to do some work with, and they were so kind about, okay, we don't say that, Kristin, we say this. Like, they were really good education for me around the language that gets used, and very kind about it as well. So, I'm grateful for that. But as I had told you, I have been wanting a show about this forever, and it just never materialized. And so I'm really grateful to Frank King for introducing me to you, and for you and to you for doing this and agreeing to have it be a part of this network.
I'm grateful for all of it. I'm grateful for Frank for even, as soon as I sent him a message, he was like, oh, absolutely. Here's my schedule. Pick a time. And we started talking. I was totally meant to come across his name. And I'm so glad this all came together, because I definitely I have so much to say, and, I have to
Yes.
say it to somebody, or if no one hears it, then what's the point?
That's the interesting thing. I'm going to switch gears just for a second. On podcasting, it's very different from being a public speaker. Just listeners, so you realize, you are speaking into a microphone. There's no audience sitting there for you to play off of. Yes, you can have a guest, and you're playing off of them. You're dipping into each other's emotional temperatures and so on to do a show, but you're not looking at them typically. I don't do that. I don't do Zoom. I probably will start doing some of those on camera as well, but I don't like to do that for a podcast, because there's so many things that we do when we see each other that don't translate to people that are just listening.
Definitely. Yes. That's 100%.
Yeah. So I'm kind of like, it's a solitary activity. So it goes along with, was I ever into team sports? Nope. I was a swimmer. I was a runner. I was not into the whole, and does that mean that I wasn't, sociable with other people? Absolutely not. But the thing about podcasting is, it is a lone ranger activity.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. It's that thing of, you have stuff to say and you want to get it out.
Yeah. And especially when you're someone who typically would rather not be on camera. So
Right.
I think when I take away the things that give me the social anxiety and just the fact that I'm staring at myself, and you take that away and you can kind of just ramble on, and
Yes.
true thoughts start to come out because you're not sitting there thinking, oh, my hair doesn't look very good right now. You're just talking. It's almost like your internal dialogue coming out.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you. That's perfect. Yeah. All that stuff that we in society associate with who someone is based on their outsides.
Yeah, and it's important to take that away sometimes, just to kind of be in the moment and not be focusing on everything else that is taking away from what your goal is. And it's funny because being trans is, one of the biggest issues that trans people deal with is gender dysphoria. And if we didn't have eyes, no one would have gender dysphoria in the first place.
Yeah.
Because we have the society of, masculine versus feminine. There's no in between. You have to be one or the other. And if you come out as a trans man, female to male, and you're not quite as masculine as your neighbor who is a man, you don't look, you're not a man, why do you dress like that?
Right.
So everyone's being judged at all times. And yeah, so what you said, the podcast thing, is I think that's why I was drawn to it, because we're talking about something that is actually such a visual thing. And the reason why it's so hard to be trans right now is because it's such a visual thing and people are so judgmental. And
Yes.
on a podcast, all you hear is the voice. So, the person can be wearing whatever they want. You just be comfortable and talk.
Exactly. There's no fat shaming involved. There's no gender shaming involved. I mean, all of those things that make it difficult to walk around and be human. It's already difficult. People that don't, let's say your typical white male, straight male. I was talking about this with my son, white, straight male. Okay. He said to me, we were having a big discussion about politics, and he's so happy with what's going on now, but he goes, I have to stop and go, look at how easy I actually have it in the world with the amount of things I don't have to be concerned about.
Right. That acknowledging the privilege of where you are in that. Yeah. I actually just wrote an article on Medium a few days ago about privilege of, it was for allies. It was for people who aren't trans, but are either dating someone who's trans or have a friend or a cousin. It was kind of showing, I'm not saying that just because you have privilege, you're just this bad person, but it's the curiosity and the questions that are asked. It almost, if you go back to, the root of why those questions are being asked, it's because you have the privilege of not having to worry about that when you walk outside. And of course, that can pertain to literally anything and any type of person. But if you break it down, it's, when I first was coming out and going through the transition, I didn't have facial hair yet or anything. And I'd be speaking to someone, some of the first questions I would get is, okay, so what's in your pants? So
oh my God.
If you take a step back, you realize that you do have a privilege as a non-trans person of just asking that. You have that curiosity. No one's ever going to ask you that question if you're not trans.
Right.
And so it doesn't necessarily mean that they're trying to be hateful or trying to bully you or trying to make you feel bad. But that curiosity that comes from not being trans when you talk to a trans person is definitely a privilege that you have, because when you're out in the world, you're not worrying about that. You're not worrying about if people are wondering what gender you are. So it definitely does pertain to privilege a lot.
Ooh, yes. I hadn't even thought about it that way. Absolutely. No one's ever asked me what's in my pants.
Exactly. It's an uncomfortable question.
I mean, I have had people, ask about my sex life or, those kinds of things. But in terms of like physicality,
Right. Yeah. It's something that.
How do you not like take it's just, yeah, I would have a really hard time. I have a hard time already with my face in terms of, I just like every emotion is displayed on I'm horrible at poker. I don't have a poker face. So if somebody, I would just be immediate. That's probably another reason why I'm not on camera.
The podcasts are for.
Yes, because I it would be hard not to just have my jaw drop and be like, "Do you realize what you just asked?"
Yeah, and you want to have that response, but at the same time, you want to kind of remain composed. And also, in the sense of what's going on in my head is complete and utter embarrassment and
Oh,
pretty much into it. But there's just a way of when you go out into public as a trans person who's not completely passing, you're already terrified of getting questions and being stared at. So when someone asks you that question, you don't want to make a big deal about it. You don't want to be upset or show any emotion really, but you want to have the correct answer to kind of shut them up.
right.
And when I told Frank that, Frank's answer was a little more graphic, but he
I'm
had a
so
very,
not surprised.
he was like, "Why don't you just say this?" And yeah, his was pretty good. But when you try to speak to someone who, let's say, you don't know them very well, and you get asked a question so ridiculous like that, you want to have that answer of just okay, let's take a step back here. That's not completely appropriate, but if you are interested in questions like that, I'm happy to answer them. Maybe worded a little differently, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and it's
Yeah,
yeah, and it's not like every human has always asked the perfect question about anything. I mean, it's part of the human experience is stepping in it about many things over the course of your lifetime and then figuring out how to navigate that. And I always love people like my stepfather as an example, who just was so okay in his skin that he stepped in it all the time on things, as any human does, and he just kind of laughed about it. Okay, well, I guess I'll learn better for next time.
yeah, and as long as you do learn, I guess that's probably the most important thing, because you can't stop humans from being curious about things. Curiosity is actually very important, and I guess the more that trans people are educating other people, that curiosity won't be as jolting. And sometimes I just want to say, why don't you Google it? Just Google it.
Right. 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 Because, you're not always in a space. Let's say you got cut off in traffic and you are just heard the worst news ever about a family member and, life stressors. And so
Yeah,
your reservoir of patience is, like nil. So
mhm.
then, Google it is being kind.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't necessarily mean that I want to shut you down, but sometimes it's not the time. It's just not the time sometimes. And a lot of times I will say, wow, that's actually a really good topic for an article or a podcast. Like, do you want to talk about it on a podcast?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of it's actually why I have the clients that I do have, and it's why I have, the very few followers on social media that I do have, because I do like to open up the floor to have kind of unrefined questions of when you open up a book or an article or go to a website about trans stuff, a lot of times things are left out because it can be taken as inappropriate or it's not family friendly. And I wanted to have a mix of family friendly, but also we're going to talk about things that actually need talked about, because you can't really educate. I mean, if you have a trans person come to you and say, I have this issue, it's embarrassing, and I can't find the information about it, I don't know who to talk to, that's to me is a red flag that there aren't enough resources out there, because there are enough trans people in the world where everything should be answered at this point. There should be support in every area that is needed. So I was thinking back on my transition. I started transitioning around 10th grade ish, maybe 11th. And the things that I was going through, I was almost figuring out all on my own. I remember having a few YouTubers I watched and a few, there weren't really any podcasts. It was just a few things on the internet. So now I look back and I think, okay, what was the hardest part of my transition and what did I do to get through it? Well, I wrote and I got through it on my own. Would it have been easier had I had someone there to talk to? Would it have been easier had I had a therapist who was actually trans and not just guessing from a textbook? So I try to incorporate all of the biggest struggles that I went through, and I want to put them out there so that, I was lucky that I was strong enough to get through it, but not everyone was. There are people that aren't here right now because they weren't. So if I can take those biggest issues that I almost didn't make it through and put it out there and make it normalized and show that this is something that not just you are going through, I went through it too.
Yeah.
Talk. I'm here for you. We can get through it. I want to have more resources out there. And that's pretty much where I started a few years ago, and with, you know, two or three clients. And it's been great, because when if I get off of a call with somebody and they told me that they've been searching for an answer or for support for 3 years and they finally have it, that's what I'm doing this for.
Right.
Just if one person per year says I helped them get through a bout of depression, or I helped them come out to their grandmother, or I helped them have the confidence to go back to college, that's important to me, because I
Yeah.
remember how hard it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And to have the compassion to go and do this and be an advocate. And, not everybody wants to do that, and that's totally fine. But that's what advocacy is there for. Not everyone that struggles with mental illness wants to go talk about it publicly, and that's totally fine too.
I totally understand that. For a while, I didn't want to be known as the trans person or the trans mentor or that trans guy on Instagram. I didn't want
Right.
to have that label. I actually, I had so many friends that would wear shirts to, pride events and to class that say, this is what trans looks like, or they would have it in their bio on their social media. That was never me. I was not that necessarily I wasn't hiding, but I wanted to just be known as Seth, the man,
Right.
not the trans man.
Right.
And then I realized a few years ago that I could actually use what I've been through to help other people. And that's more important than remaining, what label I want to remain. And I don't regret that. I definitely, at this point, I think it just took some time to have that self-confidence of, do I actually care if someone knows I'm trans? Because I did for a very long time. I don't anymore.
That's good. That's good. Mental health bubble. There's the mental illness bubble. There's the trans bubble. There's the cisgender bubble, and so I'm in this mental health bubble, which includes mental illness. And a few people have come to me lately that were referred by somebody else that's not in the mental health field, but the discussion on my podcast could be, under that mental health umbrella.
Yeah.
And they referred a bunch of people to me, which is great. But many of those people have old views about what mental health is, and see it as, oh, that's mental illness. And I have to do a lot of education, like what you're talking about on, okay, well, no, mental health is mental health, and mental illness is a part of it, but it's not that. They're not the same verbiage. They're not the same thing. And people, having that just bias around what that means, just all those things that happen when you're not in your little bubble. And it's always a little shocking for me, but then I have to remember, oh, that's what I do this for.
Exactly. Yes. Just to spread that and educate people who aren't necessarily not on board, but in an entirely different mindset.
Yeah, exactly. So it's always interesting. Well, tell my listeners what kinds of guests you might have, when your show is going to be ready to move. I mean, we have the trailer up now, but give them an idea of launch and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have about 8 or 9 completed episodes that I wanted to have a nice bunch of episodes ready to go so I can kind of stagger them out, because I'm kind of turned off when I see a podcast with just one episode from 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Going or not. So I wanted to have some ready to go. And the first episode is kind of just me talking about who I am, where I'm from, what I've been through, and where I'm at today. And the second, third, fourth, I have some special guests. I have some discussions. There's one where I answer questions that were actually submitted by trans people. And what I'm most excited about, and I'm actually recording today, is I wanted to have a parent of a transgender person come on, and I chose my mom. So, and that's just, I'm so excited for that one, because the journey of what she has been through, there's 2 sides to every story. So I can tell it as much, I could talk about it all the time, but I have yet to sit down with her and say, like, okay, it's been 10 years. Where are you at? Because
Right.
the shock that I gave her when I first came out to her, she has come such a long way. She has educated herself and on her own time, and it's amazing where she's come from to where she is today. And I think people will really will be interested in that, because so many of my clients are either people who are afraid to tell their parents or actual parents. And you have that, there's two different types of parents that I typically speak to. You have the parent who is like, okay, I believe my child is trans. Where do I go from here? And then you have the parent that is almost fearful that their child is trans. And they come to me saying, is there any way that, what is the healthy way to go about this? And is there a way to, almost trying to say in a nice way, I don't want them to be trans. So what do I do?
Right.
So you have the parents who are educated on it and know that letting the child be themselves is healthy. Then you have the parents who think that it's almost abuse to let them be themselves. So that's something that's really interesting. And my mom has gone through all of that and the grief that parents go through because they feel that they've lost their daughter or son.
Right.
And so I'm really excited about that episode. But yeah, I plan to put these first 8 or 9 episodes out and just over the next few days staggered. But after that, I plan to post 1 episode per week. I'm thinking Tuesday evenings.
Fantastic. I mean, it's like I said, I've been wanting this on the network for a while. And so I'm just really honored that you consent to be a part of what we're doing.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm actually incredibly excited. This is something that I didn't, when I started talking to Frank that first day, this is not what I imagined it would get to. It's such a fast, I wasn't even reaching out to him about trans stuff, and it just got to here. And I look back and I'm like, wow, I'm so glad this all fell into place.
I know I try to tell people, they're like, well, how soon can you get my show up? New podcasters. And I'm like, listen, we are like carpenter ants. Like the minute that you say go, it's really up to you to how quickly things can happen. Cause if we're waiting on things, like I didn't even wait for you as an example to send me a header image. I put one up that looks like your square image. And we'll change that as you send it to me. But I mean, we just like ba-boom, 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 because how we look at it is, here's another voice speaking to another segment of the population. It needs to be heard. It's our honor to help make that happen. So we better get moving, is how we all look at it here.
I can't even tell you how much I appreciate that, because I'm someone who does need that push of like a rush almost, because if I have something due in 2 weeks, I'm like, I'll get around to it later. But for you and Frank to be, almost, well, especially Frank, just like, you got to do this now. This is what you're supposed to do. Just do it. And then, we planned this Tuesday, and 5 days ago, I was like, oh, it's Tuesday, but now it's Tuesday. So it actually is giving me that motivation and that energy to like, let's get this going. Why wait? Let's do this.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So I want to do a show, and maybe I'll do a series of shows about it. I'd love for you to be on it. And listeners, the reason why I'm saying this to you is because, being an advocate is a whole other thing. It's a whole other realm that you step into, because you can just be you going through life, and that's totally and completely fine and wonderful. And then there's something about when you want to advocate for the greater good in some way or another that sort of moves you into a different space. Our brains kind of work differently.
Yes, I've felt that over the past few weeks of kind of taking this to another level. Just for example, I went into all my social medias and I was like, okay, make sure my bio is good. Make sure there are pictures from like 6 years ago. Make sure I look at everything, because people are going to be looking.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much out on the internet about me, and some, I can't keep up with it anymore. I'm sure some of it's old and not relevant anymore, whatever, you do get to this point where it becomes this avalanche and you just can't stay on top of it. But yeah, in that beginning, you want everything to kind of go out, the way that it does, because there are eyeballs on you. Then you get on TV shows and stuff, or news programs, and then you're like, okay, yeah, there's no going back now.
Yeah. So you might as well just be yourself anyway.
Exactly. That's what people, resonate with anyway, is you. So what a wonderful way to have full permission to excavate and examine and learn to really love and appreciate all that is you.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I love that I can't really be offensive because I am trans. So I could say what I want.
That's right. Exactly. Well, tell our listeners the name of the show.
Okay. The name of the show is Transpired, and it will actually be able to be viewed, or you can, use Spotify or Apple Music or whatever platform you use. But I will have it on my website, which is thetranslife.org. And that's just kind of a website that gathers a bunch of resources together. I have some blog posts on there, and it's still growing. I get ideas every here and there, and I'm like, oh, that'd be good for the website. So translife.org is where everything originated. And now the Transpired podcast is kind of branching off from there to have some discussion.
Fantastic. Well, Seth Carlson, thank you again so much for coming on the show and for being a part of this network.
I appreciate it. I'm super honored. Thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio. Hi, listeners. I'll make it quick. These are some really cool places that give discounts and other cool things for listeners of Mental Health News Radio Network. If you want to get amazing help with healing from narcissistic abuse, go to healfromanarcissist.com. If you want CBD products that are the best of the best, I use them myself, go to proze.com and use the code mentalhealth20, mentalhealth20. If you want to get daily perk ups that help retrain your brain to think more positively, go to perkupdaily.com. And also, just because this one's fun, snarkycandles.com. I guarantee you'll love them. Snarky with a Y, SNARKY candles.com. And don't forget, if you want to hear all the shows on the network about first responders, you can go to firstrespondernmentalhealthnetwork.com, and all of our shows that focus on narcissistic abuse, narcissisticabusehealingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
But will you ride the low, low, lows with me? Will you ride the low, low, lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristin Sananta Walker, and thank you for listening.
And I can ride the low, low, lows with me. I can ride the low, low, lows with me. Till my vision clears up perfectly. I can ride the low, low, lows with me.
Good boy.